Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's topic. We're going to talk about the Grandmaster response and relationship to the Budapest defense. This is another one of those openings that is rarely seen at the very top levels of chess, but very popular at club level. And I actually think it's a very interesting opening. So let's get right into it. What is the Budapest defense? Well, it starts after White plays d4, knight f6, and the queen's gambit must be played c4 and e5. So if your opponent plays knight f3 in the opening and you've spent 14 hours studying the Budapest, well, here you'll probably be out of luck because playing e5 right here with the knight and pawn guarding it would not work out too well. You wouldn't end up where you want to end up if you're playing the black pieces. So this only applies to the common move c4. All right. So true Queen's Gambit players are gonna respond c4. And the reason why it's called the Budapest defense. It used to be called the Budapest counter gambit because black used to often turn it into a real gambit, giving up a pawn for time. But so now, it's basically like a defense because black, plays it as such more positionally nowadays. And this is one of those defenses that developed, like in a small area of the world. In this case, it was Hungary, right? Thus the name Budapest. A couple of masters started, analyzing it, and then it became popular in the early 1900s. All right, and actually, I think in a British chess magazine about 1920, 1919 is one of the early um, treatises on the opening. The general consensus is that it's not like all the way unsound. It's kind of on the borderline. Um, but white usually has a better position strategically uh, than black, and black's options defensively are too narrow to too kind of basic for black to really get anything going out of the opening. And so as we go on, we'll look at, like I do in the other Grandmasters versus series, we'll look and see. And again, this is not about the white side or the black side because some games black won, some games white won. But we don't judge by result. We're looking at the positions. And again, I won't be going through all of like the whole games, but just to see, basically the critical lines and what grandmasters use to play against, and what the black players that are, grandmasters on the black side, what they try in order to overcome. And then I give my conclusions, and of course you can form your own. This first game I want to look at is a game between Grandmaster Mikhail Gurevich, who's 2605, and with the black pieces, Norman's Mises, who's 2530. And this game is from 1996. E5, there's our Budapest. D takes E5. Knight G4. This is like you'll see this 98% of the time. This is the main line. There is this so-called fighting um, Fajarowicz variation with Knight E4, which is patently unsound, and I might devote a minute to that later. But first, we're gonna just deal with these main issues. So Knight G4, and of course the idea is the pawn is sacrificed, and now the knight is here on G4, and the immediate threat is to capture the pawn here. Bishop F4. This is one of the main responses, one of the most popular responses. And you'll see Bishop F4 most of the time. Knight c6, again putting more pressure on the e pawn. Knight f3 from Gorovich, defending the e pawn. Now notice how how white is not going out of his way to defend the e pawn. He's just defending it. He just happens to be defending it with natural moves, and that's a good lesson to learn about gambits in general. Is that oftentimes you don't want to try to hold the gambit pawn to the detriment of your position, but in developing, you happen to be protecting that pawn, then so be it. And that's what's happening in this case. White is not doing any crazy moves to try to, weakening his pawn structure and stuff like that, trying to hold the pawn. And meanwhile, though, black has to be on point, because if he doesn't find a way to get this pawn on the e file, then eventually a move like h3 will just kick the knight out, and the knight will be in a bad position here. And so black has to focus on that d5 pawn. Bishop b4 check. A completely natural move here. And you'll see two main lines. One is knight b d2, which is very popular, and you also see this move, knight c3. This game, knight b d2, was played by Gorovich. Queen e7, again, have to get this pawn back. Gorovich played a3, challenging the bishop immediately. And Maizi's played knight c takes e5. The threat being real simple. There's a threat here, which is not a big deal. You're just doubling the pawns after g takes f3. But the major threat is knight d3 checkmate due to the pin on the e file. Therefore, the pair of knights are exchanged. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and the threat is renewed. Checkmate again. e3. Maizi's parts with the bishop. Queen d2 and castle. So black has gotten his pawn back, and the only thing we could say here is that besides him getting his pawn back, black has no weaknesses in his position. On the other hand, white has a bit more space. Of course, you see he occupies the first 4 ranks, and he has the bishop here. So this game is definitely going to be a long game. Again, we can't say that black is lost or busted or anything. His opening worked out, the best it could. However, space and a bishop pair in the hands of Grandmasters is very significant advantage. Lower rated players might mess this up, but in the hands of trained Grandmasters, these advantages are very significant. And this next move right here, to me, just gives black like a rough position, like a very tough position to deal with right off hands. Okay, now a lot of people would just do a normal developing move right here, like bishop e2, and then black will play d6, castles. Right, these are all normal moves. Bishop f5, and black is just fine here. Okay, but this move right here to me is killer. And I looked at this game and I saw this move, c5. This is showing that supreme understanding in the position, taking more space, because that's his main advantage. Space, bishop here. He takes more space. Now he occupies the first 5 ranks of the board, leaving black with only 3. Now it's difficult to develop. If Maizi's plays d6, then now we're going to have an isolated pawn to deal with. Okay? b6. hard to deal with, right? Because now at the queen d5, and this is threatened, the knight on e5 and the rook. Okay, so knight c6, and there's two moves. You could play c takes b6. Okay, that's ugly. At the bishop d6, and if this bishop takes c7, so you can see how much trouble that simple move c5 caused. But if you miss it and play bishop e2 and black plays d6, everything's all good. But if you understand the position, then you play a move like c5, and it's very difficult all of a sudden. The game continued, rook e8. What else is there to do? So white has a nice advantage here already. It's hard to, because you look at black's position and say, wow, he has no weaknesses or anything. The weakness is space. White has too much space. He has a bishop pair and too much space. The first 5 ranks. Rook c1. Why does he put his rook on c1? He's anticipating the opening of the c file. And that's how you use your rooks. Is you want the rooks on open files or files that you think or anticipate are going to be open. Sometimes you're wrong. It's hard. Because sometimes a player, you do an awkward move or something like that. But for the most part, you want to put your rooks on files that are open, about to be opened, that you think, anticipate are going to be opened by your opponent. So, d6 eventually had to be played. How are you going to get that bishop on c8 out? C takes, d6. And there's the isolated pawn. And voila, look at where the rook is magically placed, right on the open file. Game continued, bishop e2, bishop e6. Castle, rook ac8, queen d4, attacking here. And white had a significant advantage, and Mikhail Gorovich went on to win that game. So the key thing to remember about that line right there is this move c5 is very, very, very strong move in that position. Okay, let's move on. In the game between Luc van Wylie and Ariel Sorin, which took place in 1995, Luc played knight c3 in response to the check on bishop b4, as opposed to the knight b to d2 as you saw in the last game. Knight c3, and black is pretty much compelled to take and doubles up the pawns. Okay, nevertheless, white is still up a pawn. Queen e7. So in this line, white tends to hold the pawn, and black hopes to achieve compensation in form of activity, and also the fact that white's pawns are less valuable since they're doubled. So queen d5, queen a3, rook c1, right, protecting the pawn. F6, and here's the gambit portion, because there's really no other way to really deal with this pawn on e5 now except to gambit in this line. Alright, so if instead of f6, if black just tries to castle, then h3 as mentioned before, and black is in dire straits already. If queen takes a2, same thing, h3, knight h6. Black could take with bishop takes h6 and destroy the pawn structure, but better is just simply g4. Again, continuing on with that theme of space. Again, look how many ranks white occupies. It's overwhelming the position. It's hard for black to do anything and unravel. So at this point, after rook c1, f6 is necessary in this line for black to gambit the pawn, and this is where you get that Budapest Gambit idea from. So now it's down a pawn. So e takes f6, knight takes f6, and in exchange for that pawn, he hopes to have compensation in forms of increased activity, etc. But it seems practice shows that it's just not enough for black to have full compensation here. In this game, Soren went queen d3. Excuse me, Van Luke went queen d3 and Soren went castle. G3, d6, and I'll just run through it briefly. Bishop g2, queen c5, knight g5 was played. G6, castle from Van Riley, king g7, and basically black just doesn't have enough compensation for the pawn. He's just down a pawn. He played knight e4 here, just trading some pieces. Or he could have instead of even playing knight e4, he could have put this rook on a more productive file here, playing rook b1 with this idea, coming to rook b5, which is a devastating idea. So at this point, again, white is just, he has double pawn, but it's, he has a bishop there, more space, and his upper pawn. Even stronger than this move, queen d3, is another idea here. It's queen d1. What's the idea behind queen d1? Well, the idea is after d6, again, remember your upper pawn, and it's just the offer and endgame, right, which black is pretty much compelled to go into. So after queen b3, then queen takes b3, a takes b3, again consolidating those pawns, and again just being up a pawn. And it's just a sample sample situation, sample line, I'm sorry. And again, white is just better. And again, Van Riley went on to win that game with the extra pawn. In the game, Anatoly Karpov versus Nigel Short in the candidates match 1992, game 1. Short had the black pieces. Karpov continued with that classical bishop f4. Knight c6 was played. Knight f3. There's the check. And Karpov opted for knight bd2 as opposed to knight c3. And this kind of fits Karpov's style. Queen e7, e3. Knight g takes e5. Knight takes. Knight takes. All right. Bishop e2. Castle. Castle d6. So we see here white doesn't have as much space as he did in the other variation. Because it's very dangerous if one of the downsides is trading this bishop off early, as we saw in the first game, is that there's some ideas with that c5 as we saw in the first game with Gorovich. So here d6 is played, but then you'll see a different problem arise here. Karpov plays the move knight b3, and now after knight b3, the bishop no longer has the option of trading itself for the knight. And now there's ideas that white has to play a3, and if bishop a5, of course he loses the bishop outright. But if bishop c5, then the pawns get doubled, and that's just another weakness that Karpov can work on. Also, again, as is a common theme in this opening, white obtains the bishop pair. So space, the basic themes that white goes for in this opening: space, bishop pair, and he focuses his assault against the black queen side. It's the basic theme. So there, now we see b6 here. All right. There's a3, bishop c5. Real simple play by Karpov. Okay, now we have this pawn structure weakened. We're going to attack the weakness now. Karpov plays b4. Really simple stuff. The problem is here is if c takes b4, a takes b4, and now you have the weak pawn on a7. Okay? Let's say, for example, rook e8, h3, bishop b7, queen d4. You see, now the queen and the rook on a1 are attacking the pawn on a7. If he tries to move like a5, for instance, to liberate himself, then just b takes a5. Okay? It's pretty tough to deal with. Again, if c takes b4, just for example, if he just tried to trade the a7 pawn for the b pawn, you know, we won't have none of that. We just go b5. Okay? And now the a pawn is still under attack. And then queen d4 is coming anyway. So how did Nigel deal with this problem? He tried to keep the position under control and play knight d7, because the other threat is simply to take here and then double the black pawns in the c file, which is ugly. So he moved this knight to d7. Okay, Karpov, being a former world champion, had a good move ready. He played bishop g4. Idea is simply to snap the knight off and capture here. Again, leaving the pawns looking suspect on the c file. Right, it's hard to play. You see, even though you're not losing right there as black, you're probably gonna lose in the long run against especially against a strong player. It's hard to keep defending that. All right. Short plays a5. Of course, he would love a move like b5, just closing up the position. Strong player is not going to do that. Bishop takes d7, b takes d7, b takes c5, d takes c5, and Karpov had a nice advantage, and again went on to win the game. Let's move on. Another line you'll see, instead of bishop f4, which again I think is most popular and probably critical line, is you'll see knight f3 a lot also. And white has different plans for this bishop. A lot of times this bishop will end up on b2 after moves like b3. And sometimes the bishop will sit on c1 and support this pawn on e3 and the later f4. So when e3 is a little weak, this bishop will be here supporting this this pawn on e3. This game is from Tony Miles, I think Britain's first Grandmaster, and versus American Grandmaster William James Lombardi, known as probably most famous for being one of Bobby Fischer's second, or Bobby Fischer's only second. Okay, and this game took place in 1979. So after knight g4, knight f3 was played, bishop c5, and this is this is the main line. When that bishop doesn't come out, bishop c5 is played, and the attack on this pawn is immediate on the f2 pawn. So, all right. So after e3, defending the obvious threat, knight c6, bishop e2, just normal development. Knight takes, castle, d6, knight c3, and Lombardi went with a6 here, b3, and we can see the idea of bringing the bishop to b2, and bishop b2, and this is a little bit less critical than bishop f4. This game continued, bishop a7 for Miles, queen d2, rook e8, knight d5, and white is making use of this outpost. This is like you know, some Nimzovich stuff right here, bringing the knight on knight to d5 in order to provoke this c6 and then attack the weakness that's left behind on d6. And we can see that right here. So bishop takes, queen h4. Rook d6 is possible here, but the idea is then to play knight g4. Okay, and then if h3, Lombardi had this idea, knight takes, because remember you have the bishop hidden back here. And then if f takes e3, then the powerful rook takes e3 is winning. So black takes on this weakness, and he attacks on the queen side as compensation. And of course, instead of queen takes d6, Miles opted for this endgame and figured get the queens off the board, then snatch the pawn. But black is just in time to protect this weakness, and black was able to comfortably draw this game. This game was between Vallejo Ponce, 26-35, versus Alfonso Romero Holmes. This was from the Spanish Championships 2002. This was an insane game. After knight f3, bishop c5, e3. Ponce had the white pieces. Knight c6. Same stuff. Bishop e2, castle. Rook e8. Again, b3 with the idea of putting the bishop on b2. a5 for Romero Holmes. There's that attack on the bishop. This time the bishop goes to f8. Bishop a7, of course, is also possible. But he might have been concerned about this move right here, c5, which again is dangerous if you remember that first game, giving white so much space, because then it's hard to play moves like d6 and b6. So he opted to go for bishop f8, keeping an eye on that diagonal. f4. Okay, so this is one of the ideas that I was speaking of when the bishop stays on c1, and after this f pawn is advanced, the e pawn can become a little weak. But with the bishop on c1, it backs up this pawn. Okay, and then now we can see again one of the benefits of the f square being left vacant is that the f pawn can be pushed, and then white can pursue ideas of attacking on the king side with classical ideas like rook f3, etc. Okay, so the strategy is a little different in that line. So knight g6, queen d2, and now the queen is taking the place of the bishop defensively, as this bishop is going to go to b2. b6, obviously wanting to play bishop b7, bishop b2, bishop b7. Okay, so the fight for e4 is on. Bishop f3, queen b8. Planning on replacing this bishop on b7 with the queen, again maintaining that control on e4. Rook a d1. Okay, notice that this pawn was left for grabs. If queen takes here, then simply rook takes e3. So rook a d1, knight h4. Vallejo still doesn't want to trade the bishops. Plays d5. Fantastic move by Holmes, putting that pressure here. Bishop takes f7, and Ponce, the game just burst into fireworks after this. So bishop takes f7, king takes f7, queen takes d7, check. The king comes out, right? That's really the only move to protect his piece. If he goes back, then white is just winning after this. So he has to protect the piece. He comes out. Romero Holmes, king g6, g4, This is getting crazy. Knight takes e3, so now we have two rooks attacked. f5 check. King g5, so the king is moving forward into the fire. f6 and queen c8. Look at the defense and concentration that's being shown by Romero Holmes here. So now the idea to trade off the queens. Now what? Ponce finds a nice move here. F takes g7. Okay. And the idea, of course, is if queen takes d7, then g8 queen. So here Romero Holmes plays bishop d6, which looks like a natural move because queens are still about to be traded, right? He cuts off the protection of the queen from the rook here and halts this idea because he figures he could just take right here with the rook. Now, Ponce finds this move and it's just absolutely incredible. g8 queen, check. Rook takes g8. h4, check. King takes h4. Queen takes h7. King g3. Queen h2 check. King takes g4. Rook d4 check. And it's mate in 6. And Romero Holmes had to resign there. Just an absolutely amazing game. I think that's Vallejo Ponce's immortal game. A lot of people don't know about that game. I looked at this game like years ago. I always thought that was the best game. One of his, it's immortal game. I mean, he played some game there. Now, Romero Holmes played an excellent game too, and it takes two to tango, and that's to me what made it such a fascinating game. I just wanted to show you real quick. Instead of his fatal error was this move bishop d6, which looks so natural. What he had to play here was trade off the queen first. Queen takes, and then allow this move check. And then he has to play bishop g7. Of course, this stuff is easy to see in hindsight and computer analysis and stuff like that. But this is what he had to go into. Bishop f6 check. King g6. And now queen takes h7 had to be played. And then you go into this this ending. And the game is still up for grabs here. But I just wanted to show you that game in order to show you the difference in ideas. The bishop f4 line for white is a little bit calmer and positional in nature when white plays this immediately. This knight f3 line can lead to a lot of fireworks. You can still play it calmly as white if you want to, but if you like a lot of tactics, you can play it like Ponce and have this idea with f4. Bishop b2 and then f4. And then choose to go for a kingside attack of your own. Last game I want to show in this line is between Timur Radjabov and Anton Karpov. This is game from 2002. And just to bring it back to earth, bring it back to normal lines, this is normally how this line is played without all the without all the fireworks. Again, it's very important that attack on that bishop, gaining the tempo, and it gains time because knight goes to a4, which clears the way for his own bishop on c1 to come to b2. And black's plan here usually always to try to conduct a kingside attack with this knight on e5, the rook coming to e8, and many times you'll see this rook come up here, g6, f6, h6, and white's attack usually will take place on the queen side. Sometimes he does switch. Again, there's that idea of taking on this, sort of weakness. Radjabov goes straight for an endgame, and that kind of, puts a damper on Black's main plan of attacking on the queen side. Now the queens are gone, and he just has more space in the position. Game continued, and we see we had this type of like almost like a pseudo Marazzi bind, and White just has a slight space advantage, and Radjabov went on to win that game. Black created some more weaknesses. Black could have drew this game, but I just wanted to show you this game because it's usually played slower in this manner, with the more positional feel to it. And this is one of those games where Black could have held, but, White had more space, and he just, was stronger. Radjabov was about 100 points higher in rating. He just slowly outplayed Karpov in this position. As promised, I said I was going to look at this 94. Now, it's hard to find Grandmaster versus Grandmaster games in this line, serious games. You might find some blitz games and things like that, or rapids and such. But the basic move that's played here is A3. And A3, I think, just like for a quick memory aid, the moves A3 and G3 are moves that you probably would like to just remember as White when thinking about this line. Reason why is because 94 is centralizing Black's knight, but mainly the attack is coming on the dark squares. As you see, the knight is covering C3, D2, F2, etc. And in combination with bishop moves like bishop C5, right? Again, dark square attack. Bishop B4, dark squares. Excuse me. Queen H4, threatening mate here, dark squares. Just remember that. Black's whole concept is based on attacking on the dark squares. Now you can play moves like Queen C2 and stuff like that, but a lot of times you could get into some trouble at the bishop B4, and then sometimes Black will gambit pawns, play the D pawn, and then moves like bishop F5 where your queen is lined up here. A good response is A3. Queen H. This game, I'm sorry, is between Tiger Hillop Person versus a player named Heinzel, who's rated about 2,400. This game took place in 2006. But this is a typical game that will happen in this Fajarowicz variation. Queen H4, right, threatening mate immediately. It's like, come on, son, you're not gonna mate nobody like that. G3, gaining time against the queen. Queen H5. Okay, so you want to stop me from moving my E pawn? Okay, big deal. Bishop G2, gaining time, right? And now gains the pawn back. Now you tell me how much time has been wasted gaining this pawn. Okay, so this can't be good. This is like a worse variation of the Budapest. So at least in the main lines, Black gains the pawn back, using his pieces, and he even gambits a pawn. I'd rather do that than come out like swinging my queen around the board, and then getting hit with knight F3 as it happened in the game. And you can see with real simple and straightforward development that it's no problem for White to have an advantage here. Okay, so Queen C2 now. Knight goes back. Knight C3. Bishop E7. And it's just too easy. H3. His idea here is G4. He's just gonna expose the queen, more. This player played Knight G4 and quickly lost the game. Now this is a game between two grandmasters. Again, Luc Van Riley against Lev Albert, the author of many books. And this took place round 6 of the New York Open in 1994. Again, A3. It's the easiest I'm not even saying that's the strongest move, but it's good enough for this opening, which is not really, nothing to worry about. Because once you understand that he's just moving this piece around, there's no threat. The knight is just sitting in the center of the board. This opening is kind of like based on tactics against the dark squares and hoping you make a mistake. So it's like, played a lot in blitz and things like that. But once you get those two moves down, A3 and G3, it kind of shuts everything down for black. Again, the idea is not, just to mate in one, but it's so primitive, this idea, because the main idea is to gain the E pawn back, just like in the other line. But again, you're using your queen, moving your queen around early in the opening, which everybody knows is a no-no. But for some reason, these things persist in chess. So G3, Queen H5, Bishop G2. It's just too easy. Queen takes E5 for white. That is Queen C2. There's the double attack on the piece. What else? Knight F6. Knight F3, gaining time on the queen. It's just, again, look at the development. Nice position for white. Bishop E7. H3. This time, without the idea of G4 as was played in the Hillock-Person game. But G4 is a great move here. You can play Bishop F4. You just have a lot of options. Van Wiley opted for E4, D6, and now you have this pawn. And then he played B4, and he went on to win a nice simple game here. Okay, I think it's time to conclude. All right, now most of the games you're going to see at Grandmaster level, their solution, I think, is going to start after Knight G4. First of all, you're going to get Knight G4 as opposed to Knight E4, which is quite dubious. All right, Knight G4. Most of the games that Grandmasters prefer to play either the move Bishop F4, or you will see this move Knight F3. They're both pretty much neck and neck in popularity. So it depends on what style of player you are. If you want to play a calmer game, more positionally oriented game, I recommend that you go with this move, Bishop F4. And after Bishop F4, I prefer the line with Knight C3, holding on to the pawn. That's what the line I prefer. So just to refresh real quick. After Knight C6, Knight F3, Bishop B4. Remember we had two choices, Knight BD2 and Knight C3. I prefer the line Knight C3. Take the pawn. Play Queen D5. Let black gambit. F6, Knight takes, and just drop back to D3. I think that's a very solid approach. And the onus is on black. Now black can try this move Queen A3, or he can play D6 as in this game. But again, I think that black, just simply down the pawn. Now, if you don't want to take on the double pawns, but you still enjoy the F4 line, Bishop F4, well, instead of playing Knight C3 in response to the check, you just simply play Knight BD2. And then the game will take on a more positional flavor to it. After Queen E7, and so on and so forth. And then after, say, Knight A3, Queen D2 castle. Let's see what else. E3. Knight G takes E5. Knight takes E5. Let's get rid of all these arrows. Knight takes E5. Again, a very strong move in this position. It's a simple move like c5. And you might say, well, isn't that pawn just hanging? You exploit the queen coming out early. He played rook c1 and white is already better. Okay, this queen has to protect the c pawn and the knight here. Queen d6 is the only move. And you simply end up like that. And that's why c5 is so strong. So that is definitely a move to look forward to in these type of positions. Remember, space and the pair of bishops, okay, when it comes to that bishop f4 line. And that's basically what these grandmasters do. Now, if you don't want to play the bishop f4 line, you could play just knight f3 right away. But then you have to contend with bishop c5, and then e3 is forced, of course, and then you're going to play a plan either with b3 and putting a bishop on b2, okay, which is a more calm positional game, and I don't think that is as critical. Or you're going to play a wild game like in that Vallejo Ponce game against Romero Holmes, where you're going to wind up playing f4, e3 and f4. Again, just to refresh, you'll have these type of positions after bishop c5, then e3. And this is like that Radjabov-Korobov game I showed you. Bishop gets driven back, remember, not here because it's c5. And the bishop winds up on b2. That's usually what you do when, you decide not to bring the bishop to f4. But again, besides the positional approach, there's the other approach with leaving the bishop here on c1 and playing f4 and then trying to conduct a kingside attack of your own with the white pieces. So this was what happened in that Romero Holmes game, just so you can see the difference in plans. So he played b3 all the same, knight a4, and then went with f4 instead of bishop to b2. f4 attacking the knight, and then we saw that basically all hell broke loose there. So white was willing to take on this backward e-pawn in order to try to facilitate this kingside attack over here. Again, this was some game where basically white pulled out all the stops, and then a back and forth game went on to win. So this again, you don't have to play like this, but I just wanted to show you that option. It's a wild game with the white pieces, but some players like to play like that. But normally this takes on a more quiet positional flavor to it. And then instead of f4, a move like bishop b2 would be on the menu. And then white would try to build up pressure on the d file, etc. And in Nimzovich fashion, queen moves like queen, maybe the d2, rook a d1, and try to provoke c6 and then build up pressure against the weak d pawn. All right, so that is my conclusion, is that I prefer the lines with bishop f4. Okay, bishop f4, and either knight c3 or knight bd2 is good. I like white space advantage. It's two bishops, and I think that black's counterplay is just not sufficient in order to really give white any problems, and that's why I feel that this opening for black is basically relegated to the lower levels of chess practice. All right, I just think that white space advantage, two bishops, just too much in this opening, really, for it to be you know, a serious contender to move into popular openings at the top levels of chess. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I know it was long, but I hope you did learn something. You might have to review it a few times, but questions and comments are welcome. And please like and subscribe. All right, and I'll see you on the next video. If you have any suggestions for other openings that you want to see, you know, Grandmasters versus, you know, just let me know. Right now, if you notice, I've been focusing on more of like the club level openings, because a lot of people have trouble with these openings. They go to the tournaments and they lose to, you know, they want to play Queen's Gambit, but they lose to Budapest Gambit or Latvian, and you know, these type of openings. And I just, you know, to me, I look at it and it's like there's no reason, you know, little research and study, and those openings aren't really nothing to worry about. It's the mainline openings that are hard to deal with. You know, when I'm playing chess and somebody, you know, I play e4, you know, they excuse me, e4, e5, for instance, if I'm black, knight f3, knight c6, I worry about the Roy Lopez. You see, the Ruy Lopez, I worry about the main lines because those are the lines that are tough. I don't worry about King's Gambit. I don't worry about, you know, Ponziani opening, those type of obscure open, because the surprise value is there, but it's like, again, little research, and it's like you'll remember the anecdotes basically for the rest of your chess career, because you know, those openings don't really change in evaluation. Like you know, and the more obscure the line is, usually the line is you know, it's easier to find equality, or there's several ways to equality. You know, so but anyway, that's it. Let me cut this video short. I'll see you guys on the next one.